Hey everybody, Marshall here to share some really cool news with you. I trust at this point you've all heard about Kvik yeast. This is that Norwegian ale strain that can ferment cleanly at temperatures as high as, no joke, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 38 degrees Celsius. Absolutely crazy stuff. Well, last year, Imperial Yeast dropped A43 Loki, their Kvik strain, as a seasonal release, which meant we all had a pretty small window to get our hands on some. Not anymore. Imperial Yeast recently announced they're making A43 Loki a year-round strain due to popular demand. They're excited about it. I'm super excited about it. I've had some amazing beers fermented with Loki at terrifyingly warm temperatures. It is amazing stuff. Go grab some A43 Loki and see what all the fuss is about for yourself. It's often claimed that in order to produce the best tasting beer, one must start with the freshest ingredients possible. And it makes sense. Food products in general do stale over time, and who wants to drink a beer made with old stuff anyway? Interestingly, malt is one of those ingredients that's viewed as having a relatively long shelf life, but only if it's stored properly and, of course, in its whole kernel state. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott. And in this episode, contributor Cade Job joins me to talk about the oft-worried about impact that age has on crushed malt.
Oh, yeah, Marshall. I mean, this experiment was really fun for me because I know I've done that before. Bought beer or bought grains, milled them, got them all ready to go, and then had, for whatever reason, to just not brew that day. Look a week later or 2 weeks later and go, oh, crap, I still have these milled grains. What do I do?
Yeah.
So this one's an interesting one and definitely one that I've had issues with in the past.
Anyone who's been homebrewing for longer than a couple of months, I guarantee, has experienced the, you get everything ready only to get to brew day and then something else comes up. Usually you got to go take the kids somewhere, pick them up from somewhere. You forgot that you had something else on the calendar. Back before I bought a grain mill, I did this all the time. I would purchase my ingredients from my local homebrew shop and always plan my visit to be as close to my brew day as possible because I was convinced that the milled grains would stale quickly. I've heard from more than a few people over the years who, because of changed plans, were unable to use their milled grains when they expected and were incredibly concerned with how it would affect their beer. These days, I am able to mill grain as close to mashing as I want, but I was curious to see just what kind of an impact leaving that milled grain out for a while might have, and so I put it to the test. We're going to be getting into those results in a bit. Well, Halloween is over and the holiday season is quickly approaching. Now, I know that people get really up in arms about talking about certain holidays in December before Thanksgiving happens, so I'm not going to do that, but we do know that buying gifts is going to be happening in the very near future, and we would like to ask all of our listeners to please consider using the links found over at brewlosophy.com/support when doing your holiday shopping. It's one of the easiest ways that you can support us. You'll barely even notice it, and we get a kickback that does help us to continue bringing you this show. In addition to killer online homebrew shops like More Beer, Adventures in Homebrewing, and Great Fermentations, we also have links for, well, I actually don't think we're supposed to say it overtly on the air. So that huge online store we all shop at, whose name is also a huge river in South America. Yeah. Anyway, we sincerely appreciate those who've remembered to use those links. It's super helpful. If you'd like to receive a reward for your support, you can become a patron of Brewlosophy by visiting patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rad stuff like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Our guest this month is the developer of Beersmith and host of the great Beersmith podcast, Brad Smith. If you're not already using Beersmith, I encourage you to give it a try. It's all I've used for the last 6 years, and I absolutely love it. Past guests have included folks like Michael Tonsmeyer, John Palmer, and Vinny Chilurzo, and Lars Marius Gerschel, and so many more. And all past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And finally, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we would really appreciate it. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers badass stainless equipment like the turnkey BH15 Pilot Brewing System, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware also has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. A listener named Mark, he didn't give me his last name, emailed me some feedback on our recent malt extract episode saying, my proudest brewing hack involves prepping for making yeast starters. I used to dread measuring out the DME and getting it into the flask. The DME would clump as I go, coating the measuring spoon, the inside of the funnel, the neck of the flask. Heaven forbid any water gets anywhere. And then there's the coating of it all over the kitchen counter, not to mention how long it takes. Now, when I buy a bag of DME, I measure it out with some yeast nutrient into perfectly sized vacuum sealed bags. When it's time to make a starter, I snip a corner and voila, an easy funnel right into the flask. Now making starters is a breeze.
Wow, nice. Definitely sounds like a good hack. I wish I had thought of that. Interesting, though, to see. So even if you leave it in the bags, it doesn't brick up or get hard. That's kind of surprising to me. But hey, if it works, maybe I'll start trying to do that for starters.
I know. I think this is actually a really killer idea. I'm kind of a neurotic when it comes to prepping and planning and keeping everything organized. So this would fit right in with that. My only problem is I don't make very many starters anymore these days. And when I do, they're usually, in the very rare occurrence that I make a starter, it's usually a vitality starter. So I'm using, leftover wort and pitching that yeast into a flask with that wort and leaving it for just a few hours before pitching it. But I do love the idea, and I think that hopefully other people benefit from your feedback there, Mark. So thanks for sending that in. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Schwarzbier. Dark, yet not too roasty, rich, yet not too sweet. To me, it is one of the most delicious beer styles out there, at least when it's done right. Unfortunately, it's not terribly popular, at least here in America, so I always get excited when a brewery makes one. Well, listener Carl Helmstetter recently sent me a couple Schwarzbier made by Devil's Backbone Brewing Company out of Lexington, Virginia, which I was stoked to share with my buddies.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
That's pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Pretty dark.
Pretty dark and tasty. Got a good head on its shoulders.
It does.
Yummy.
Man.
Coffee, delicious coffiness.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah, I like it too.
Coffee, roasty.
Ooh, roasty. Coffee, roasty, stout.
Tasty.
Coffee, roasty, stout.
Yeah, nailed it.
That's delish.
Yeah.
I like it a lot.
Little metallic-y on the end.
Metallic-y?
Yeah.
You're such a butthole. Metallic-y?
Now you're going to taste it. You watch.
I don't know. There's not much to say about it. It's a nice, delicious beer. I feel like I could sit by a fireplace and read a book.
Cheers.
While drinking this. Certainly not be drank by any college kids at a frat party.
Yeah.
This is for learned men.
It's good.
The kind of men that built the Eiffel Tower with brawn and steel.
Real nice like.
Real good, Clark. Real nice. I'll give it a bunch of jerseys.
With a couple of Tim's.
Bunch of jerseys and a couple of Tims. That rates a good beer.
Regular listeners of the show might recall that a few weeks ago we reviewed a Schwarzbier that was actually made by Carl, and I believe it was a clone of Devil's Backbone. I got to be honest, I really enjoyed the commercial version. It was fantastic. I think the guys enjoyed it as well. Just as every other beer I've had from Devil's Backbone, if you can get their Vienna lager, by the way, holy moly, it's delicious. But I got to give this one to Carl. I don't know if it had to do with freshness or something else, but his homebrew version was absolutely fantastic. Still, the Devil's Backbone version was really good as well. Kate, have you had the opportunity to drink Devil's Backbone beers, maybe even had their Schwarzbier?
Devil's Backbone, no, I haven't had their Schwarzbier, but I really want to try it. And really, way to go, Carl. I mean, I think if you look back at the review that Jersey and Tim did of your beer, they're talking about the exact same things whenever they in this one, whenever they're reviewing the commercial version. So that's awesome, and totally agree with you, Marshall. There's nothing better than a really well done and well made Schwarzbier.
Oh, I gotta make one sooner than later. I love that style so much. I will say, when I sit around and I kind of edit these beer reviews a little bit. We're kind of just running a stream of recording, and so I got to cut the guys out when they're talking between pours. They actually thought for a minute that they when they were doing this review that I had already served them this particular beer, and I had to convince them, no, promise you this is a different one. So it was that close. To me, Carl's was just a little bit more rich. I chalk that up just to freshness. Who knows how old the Devil's Backbone version was, but their packaging process didn't ruin the beer. It was absolutely delicious. I would have drank a whole 6-pack if I'd had it. So thank you so much for sending that in, as well as your homebrew, Carl. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brulosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. All right, we'll be back right after these messages from our sponsors. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Want to brew quality craft beer at home? The Grainfather provides a brewing system with superior design, innovative features, and the latest technology, allowing you to brew professional quality craft beer at home. Mash, sparge, boil, and cool all in one unit, meaning there's less equipment to use, clean, and store. No need for burners or hot plates. Just plug it in and brew great beer. Then get the best out of your fermentation with the Grainfather conical fermenters and glycol chiller. Plus, enhance your brewing experience with the brand new free-to-use Grainfather community app. You can take your brewing tools and your recipes with you everywhere, use brewing calculators on the fly, manage your recipes, and monitor your brew session from anywhere. Use your mobile device to manage your Grainfather brew wirelessly, automate mash schedules, and multitask without removing any of the brewing hands-on fun. Grainfather products can all be found at www.grainfather.com. Plus, as a Brulosophy podcast listener, get 10% off your order. Just use discount code Brulosophy19 at checkout. That's BRULosophy19 to receive 10% off your order. So head to shop.grainfather.com now to get this great deal. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brulosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. The idea that fresh ingredients lead to a better tasting beer isn't a difficult one to accept, and when it comes to malt, it seems similarly easy to believe that once crushed, it ought to be used as soon as possible. Why don't we start off by talking a little bit about the malting and kilning process in general, and what that does to grain?
Yeah, of course. So I think most listeners of the podcast will understand, first of all, that we are using malted barley, right? And we're not using raw unmalted grains whenever we're brewing beer. Well, there are adjuncts and things like oats and other stuff that we may be using unmalted, but for the most part, we're not putting raw barley in beer, or at least not, raw barley straight off of the kernel.
Yeah, right. It's processed in some way, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And so most of what we use, I think even if you look back years and years ago, we've always talked about even the Reinheitsgebot, malted barley, it being what is used to brew beer. So what is malting? And what does it do to the grain? What's the whole point of malting? And from a high-level perspective, malting really is converting the starches and stuff that a plant would have, sort of an energy reserve that the plant has, the barley plant, whenever it's growing these things, converting the starches, those energy reserves, into something that can eventually be transformed via enzymes into fermentable sugars. So the malting process is taking the barley energy reserves that the plant would use and turning it into something that is a precursor for what we do whenever we're brewing wort, making fermentable sugars. Malting from a high-level perspective has been done for thousands of years. So it's a super well-studied process, and there are a bunch of suppliers out there that do it. And it's also a really unique and creative process that maltsters can do. Taking what essentially may be the exact same barley plant off of the kernel and then turning it into a wide variety of different ultimate malted barleys that we use in the brewing process.
Right, and that's where kilning comes in, really. And every maltster has their own. I mean, malting is generally is a pretty similar process, but every maltster does have their own unique, take when it comes to malting their grain. And then, of course, it goes into kilning. Now, the malting process is an interesting one because it, in essence, requires the wetting of raw grain, the sprouting of an endosperm, and then cutting that off with drying of some sort. And that usually is some form of kilning, and you've got different levels of kilning. We don't want to go too deep into that. But like you said, Cade, what that does is it allows us brewers, purely from a brewing perspective here, allows us brewers to access those starches and then which enzymatically end up getting converted into fermentable sugars. Now, the interesting thing to me is that the process of malting is in essence a process of aging. It takes time to do it, the entire process. And then once it's done, we're told, in essence, that you should use that grain as fresh as possible. And yet, I've often heard people talking about grain being good if stored properly for upwards of a year or even 2 years and having minimal impact. It almost seems like it's just a super shelf-stable food product. Again, if stored properly, which basically means a dark area with minimal oxygen exposure or air contact, I guess.
Yeah, and moisture too. Moisture being a really big part of it as well. I don't know if you've ever had stored grain that had access to moisture. If you've ever accidentally opened up a sealed container that there was some moisture or whatever in, and seen that grain and seen it either sprout or just turn into this like nasty moldy mess.
I'm lucky to live in a very dry region of the United States. I've never witnessed that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it gets hot and humid here in Texas, and I've definitely experienced that before. Also, I'm sure most professional brewers have a story of where they've found, a bag of malt back behind a pallet or something like that
Right.
they didn't realize was there. But yeah, I mean, the malting process, like you said, it's essentially a storage process. So you're starting with steeping the grains. That's essentially just putting the barley in water, which allows some enzymatic conversions to start happening. And like you said, that endosperm to sprout. Then it gets moved. During that process is called the germination process, where that endosperm grows and we convert those into starches and sugars, or into extractable starches that we can, by further enzyme, pull into fermentable sugars.
Right.
But like you said, then the kilning and roasting process is where it gets dried out, and in my opinion, that's where we're doing sort of the more shelf stable thing. If you look back over the thousands of years that malt has been brewed or has been made, it makes sense that there's a final processing step, kilning and roasting it, because it's shelf stable. If we had to, if malt was available, in Germany and England and stuff, but you had to transport it around the world, to India or wherever else, or the Americas, wherever else you're brewing beer that you might not have had access to barley, you're going to want it to be stable, and getting the moisture out, drying it out so that it's not molding and it's not continuing to grow a barley plant. All together there. That makes sense, as a purpose for kilning and roasting.
Right.
But that kilning and malting actually changes the grain. Different kilning processes and roasting processes also change the husk, which is outside of the grain. And when we're talking about milling today, we'll talk a little bit about why the husk change, matters as well. When we're getting barley, we're not getting it pulverized. We're getting it in these kernels, and either roasted or kilned, dried out, and when it comes to us.
Yeah.
So, we're not just changing, the grain itself, but we're also changing some of the husk as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned milling. Now this is kind of gets closer to the point of this particular episode. I buy my grain in bulk nowadays, which is a very, very convenient thing that I feel very fortunate I'm able to do. I have my own mill. I'm able to mill on demand. It's pretty great. when I pick up sacks of grain, there's usually a date on there. And that date is fairly far out. I'm not sitting in front of a sack of grain right now, but the whole kernel barley malt, and I would imagine the same is true for wheat malt and other grains that are malted in their whole kernel form, do tend to have this extended shelf life. And my hunch would be that even past that date, they're probably pretty good. Now, we haven't done an experiment on this just yet. I feel like in our conversations, what's difficult about comparing old barley malt to a newer one is that there's no way to control for whether what field they came from or what may have been different over the 2 years time that we waited or whatever. But we should probably put that one on the list. The interesting thing to me is, despite the fact that this grain is still dried, there's this very strong belief that once it's milled, it needs to be used immediately. And we're talking to the point of, I recall telling somebody one time that I milled a batch of grain for a 5-gallon batch of beer the night before I brewed. And the comment was, you're going to produce a stale tasting beer by doing that, by leaving it out for literally 9 hours. There are people out there who absolutely refuse to use grain if it's not milled within seconds of being mashed in. I don't know what the exact argument is for why milling would somehow expedite the staling process. I don't know if you've heard anything. What exactly can it do? In my mind, when I think about it, all you're doing is changing the form in which that grain is in, and those starches. It makes no sense to me why those starches aren't going to stale any faster, whether they're encased in a grain husk. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I've heard that a number of times as well from different brewers that say, there's no way I'm going to mill as right before or as close as I can get to adding in the water and doing the mash.
Yeah.
But I've left grains out. We've all I think have done it. I have a mill now as well, but like you said, whenever I would shop at the homebrew store and have them mill my grains for me, it might be a week, 2 or 3 days at least. It would at least be overnight, because usually I'm brewing on a weekend, Saturday or Sunday, and I'm not running to the homebrew store on the day that I'm planning to brew, because that would take too much time. But yeah, I think that what sort of makes sense to me, and I don't know about the science behind this, but what sort of makes sense to me is that, okay, we've cracked open the shell, essentially. So although we haven't changed necessarily the chemical composition of the grain, we've sort of cracked it open, and we've now allowed maybe different pieces of it to become exposed to different things, moisture or oxygen or any of those other things that could contribute to staling.
Sure.
I kind of think of it as like, if you leave a piece of bread, or not a piece of bread, but a loaf of bread out on the counter, that crust gets really hard, right? And then when you crack it open, the inside is nice and soft and fluffy. But if you leave that soft and fluffy out on the counter for too long, that eventually starts to get hard, crusty, and stale too. And we see this in bread, right? In cooked bread, not in sort of raw flour, which I think would be more consistent with barley. But you see it in cooked bread, where if you leave a piece of bread out on the counter, it stales.
Yeah.
And it starts to taste bad
pretty quickly,
after a few
actually.
days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an analogy I'd never actually considered. But your line of thinking, I've constantly, this is just the my Achilles heel, but I've constantly got like 2 lines of thought going through my mind about everything.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't know, man, for better or for worse. But I'll admit, like, the main reason I was so nervous about using milled grain as soon as possible was because of an appeal to authority. It's what I'd heard from, the bigger names out there in brewing. It's what all of my friends at the time were saying you had to do. And so without any real evidence, I just did that. A part of what my own personal thinking that I used to justify that wasn't necessarily like the bread analogy. One of the things that I'd heard, and I wish I could remember who told me this or where I read it or when I dreamt this up, was that by leaving your milled grains out, that you can somehow has an impact on ultimate conversion. So you would see a dip in your OG. So for example, if I designed a recipe that was supposed to be a 1052 OG pale ale, something like that, that if I milled some grain and left it out for longer than a couple of days, I might end up making a 1048 OG pale ale because of some thing that I can't explain happening, reducing the conversion power or whatever it is of the malt because of it being milled.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that too. A bunch of things about using old milled malt is absolutely the reduced efficiency. And I don't know if it has something to do with maybe access or exposure to moisture as well. If it's milled, maybe there's more surface area for the air and moisture to get into contact with. So some of those reactions can happen faster than if you leave it in the whole kernel version. Maybe there's more to get into, sort of like that same bread crust analogy. If you've got the crust outside protecting it, if you've got the barley kernel whole and protecting it versus pulverized, maybe that's what does it. But, I look at it sort of as, well, isn't milled barley just a sort of flour? And flour, I'll leave that in a container for months.
Years, maybe? I mean,
yeah.
That's exactly my thought process as well is, if you're crushing barley malt, I like the idea, don't get me wrong, of the kernel of the malt being like this protector of that starch that we want access to, and that by breaking that open, you're allowing this, influx of oxygen and whatever else is in the environment to get in there, and it has some sort of an impact. That there's something that feels logical about that, and that's logic based on, being involved in the brewing world for however long I have been, 15, 16 years. But at the same time, like you said, if I'm thinking about other products that are somewhat similar to milled grains, flour comes to mind. And I don't know what the, Lintner is of flour. I don't know if that's being impacted. We don't really care about that so much when it comes. I don't think we do, at least when it comes to making floury foods like bread and pizza crust. But I've used flour that's well over a year old and not had any issues with it, tasting bad, tasting stale. But like you said, if I made a bread and a loaf of bread and I cut a slice off that and leave that out for 25 minutes and it starts to taste stale. So there is something different. And I just thinking about that analogy and thinking about it in that way, it really does make me wonder if maybe the focus on stale beer and that being the cause, or having milled grains sit out for too long being the cause of that, perhaps that focus is just misaligned. That the focus, the fear is producing a stale beer, and so you might as well do everything you can, because stale is the opposite of fresh. You do everything you can to use the freshest ingredients possible. And I think it goes without saying, there are certain ingredients you want to be as fresh as possible. I think hops are a perfect example of that. Old hops, especially when they're not stored properly, really do have an impact on beer. But when it comes to malt, it's just...
Yeah, for sure. I mean, freshness is always a big, a big thing, even in any, food product or beverage product. I mean, you want something that's fresh. And we've all tasted things that have staled. We talk about oxidation and how that relates to staling, over time. And I think anybody wants to avoid that. So, I think a lot of brewers looked at this whenever they were milling and said, well, maybe I shouldn't leave this out. Maybe it will be like bread. And so I just shouldn't do it. Enough people started not doing it. And then over time it becomes, like you said, the dogma of the authority that says this is how you do it. You don't crush until you get right ready to put water and mash in.
Yeah. So some thoughts, and these stem from discussions that I've had with other homebrewers, some thoughts that I have on this. One of the concerns that I've heard, and this, again, it feels like it makes a little bit of sense. When you think about barley malt or other malted grains, particularly barley malt, the one way some people view these things is that you get your fermentables from the inside of the malt, but you get your flavor, right, from the actual kilned barley, from that outside portion, right? That being the case, again, an argument that I've heard is that by whether it's milled or not, by leaving it out, by using old malt or whatever, you are actually having an impact. You're deteriorating the flavor component of that malt, even if the conversion part, that starch on the inside, doesn't get impacted. And it would make sense to me that if you increase the surface area of that, which when you're taking 16, 17 pounds of barley malt and milling that up, you've now got more open area of that flavorful grain. By doing that, allowing more oxygen to touch that. Again, I kind of convinced myself at the time that maybe that would have a negative impact on the ultimate flavor of the beer that you're making with those grains. But again, that's just speculation. I couldn't find. I dug around forever on this, and all I find is speculation in homebrewing forums.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, and that also kind of is a nice segue over into, well, why are we milling at all, right? Like, what's the whole point of milling? I think most people probably understand what that is, but in a mash, if you've got the whole grain in there, it does take time for the enzymes to get all the way to the center of the Tootsie Roll Pop, I guess is a way to say it, right? How many licks does it take to get to the center of a barley kernel? Probably a lot.
About 35 minutes.
yeah, exactly. 35 minutes. That's right. But the whole point of milling it is so that you can crack open the grain, the kernel, the endosperm in there that's now got those starches, and readily have more surface area that water and the enzymes that exist in the barley kernel can come into contact with those starches and convert it into fermentable sugars. So that's the whole point of actually milling the malt, cracking it open so that you have more surface area.
Right.
So which seems like maybe milling it open would have more surface area for oxygen or whatever to cause it to stale.
Right.
But who knows?
Well, It sure is. It is an idea that permeates the brewing world. I mean, there's no arguing. I doubt there's a listener out there who in their head is going, yeah. You want to use that malt, especially when it's milled. I mean, how many people have you talked to? You've been around long enough, who absolutely refuse to buy grain that's milled and purchase mills because of the fact of freshness. I mean, that is a huge thing. There's the added convenience of being able to brew whenever you want. That's my reason for doing it. But you just don't do that. You don't buy a sack of milled grain. You buy your grain in the whole kernel form. You keep it that way until 10 minutes before brewing. I think it's just commonly accepted to be the best practice. I've been for the last, 4 or 5 years now. I almost always, with very rare exception, mill my grain at least the night before brewing. There's been a few times where I've plans have changed and I had to wait 2 days before brewing. It comes with a fair amount of anxiety, as a nerdy homebrewer. I got to admit,
Yeah, for sure. Seeing that, malt, seeing the cracked malt sitting on my counter or wherever, even if it's in a Home Depot bucket or something like that, just sitting out and being exposed, it even still gives me sort of some anxiety going, oh, no, what's going to happen in there? Why, know, but I can't tell you why I should be concerned about that, but it just seems to make sense.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because when I mill, you got to put that milled grain somewhere. So I'll throw it in a bucket. And I recall this. I've got a couple of old fermentation buckets that don't have lids. I lost the lids, and so I'm scouring my garage and looking for something that I can put on top of the bucket to keep out any oxygen and all that stuff. And to this day, I still do that. Does it have any impact? I mean that's why we tested it out. These days, again, I'm very much I guess less stressed.
So when did you start milling your grains in not using the homebrew store's mill, but you bought your own mill and started doing that yourself?
Yeah, that was so I got a mill for Christmas. I think it was 2013. My wife very, very kindly bought me a barley crusher mill. I blew through that one. I started brewing a ton in 2014. That's when Brewlosophy ended up getting started. And so that mill did not last very long. I sent it in to the folks at Barley Crusher, and they did some stuff on it. It worked for another month or so, and then it just bit the dust. Then I ended up upgrading to a monster mill, an MM3. So it's that 3-roller, and that thing, I've had that for years, and it's still kicking ass. But so I've been milling for a long time. Again, my main impetus for getting into milling my own grain was the convenience of being able to brew on demand. It's why I went bulk with all of my ingredients. But I'm not going to lie. There was a part of me that was, it felt good to know that I could mill my grains and not leave them. I don't have to rely on the homebrew stopping at the homebrew shop and leaving those out overnight or for 2 or 3 days before brewing, like you said. How long have you been milling?
I don't know. I've probably only been milling for I'd say I guess the last 3 years or so. That I really got my mill. My main impetus for getting a mill actually was an efficiency issue. I was one of those people that was in dogmatic pursuit of making getting my efficiency higher and higher and higher. And I will say actually it did help, right? The mill, when I started milling my own grains and was actually able to control the mill gap or the crush of my grain, my efficiency actually did improve quite a bit. And I don't know if that's just because, the homebrew store was milling a little bit more coarsely than I was, or, if their mill gap just sort of, shimmies out of line, because of use or something.
Yeah. At the very least, I think the milling my own grain definitely contributed to kind of consistency, between batch consistency for me. Final question for you though, Cade. What's the longest you've let grains sit out before brewing with them? Milled grains, that is. Milled grains.
Milled grains. Let's see if I can remember. So I think, actually, I do remember. I have let milled grains sit out for almost a month on my counter. So it was a spur of the minute on a Friday before a Saturday. I thought, I'm just going to run by the home brewing store and I'm going to go ahead and get my grains and I'm going to brew this weekend. Best laid plans.
Yep.
But Saturday came around and I can't remember what it was that we had to do. But I ended up not milling on Saturday, or not brewing on Saturday. So decided, okay, well, I'll do it on Sunday. Sunday came around and also decided not to brew. And then the next 3 weekends we were traveling for, different things. I think actually one of them was a football game weekend. So my wife and I are always at the Longhorn football games, the home football games. So I think we had that one weekend, and then we were traveling for a holiday to visit family, and then traveling again to visit another family or do a wedding the weekend after. So it was a month that I let it sit milled.
Crazy.
And just on my countertop too, right? I mean, on my countertop in a clear plastic bag right next to a window. So, and I brewed that beer, and I remember being really concerned that I'd really messed something up. But the beer tasted just fine. Like I said, I didn't notice any issues at all. Have you? What's the longest you've done, other maybe than this experiment?
Well, I've done very long. We'll put it that way. And we'll save that for another episode that's focused specifically on that particular batch, because I think it's interesting. But 2 years, I went 2 years one time and used milled grain that was 2 years old. So that was a lot of fun. Making sure not to leave milled grain laying around seems like common sense. We've discussed that. But I was curious to see what would happen if I made a beer with malt that had been milled and left out for quite a while. And I tested it out for myself. Results when we return. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. BrewersFriend.com offers everything needed by brewers of all levels, from the novice to the seasoned professional, including their feature-packed recipe builder that allows brewers to track their progress and record all data to improve brewing consistency. Brewers Friend also offers a slew of new features to cater to the professional brewing industry, such as groups, which allow multiple users to access one brewery account, tank tracking, which tracks the current status of any vessel, as well as inventory projections and custom alerts. Head over to BrewersFriend.com now and use code PODCAST at checkout to save 10% on your membership. Again, that's code PODCAST at BrewersFriend.com. A few years ago, I was collecting data for an experiment, and a friend of mine stopped by to take the triangle test. As he entered my garage, he plopped a bag of milled grains down on my workbench and told me he was going to throw them away because it was too old. It had been milled a month prior, and he wasn't able to get to brewing before then. But he figured maybe I could find something to do with it. Of course, I've got a lot of friends who do this to me, I should say. I placed the bag of grains on my shelf, and I left it there for 2 years, like I mentioned before using them. Now, I'm going to go into more detail on how that went down in a future episode, but suffice to say, I was shocked with how good the beer turned out, which is ultimately what inspired me to design an experiment focused on the impact age has on milled grain. For this batch, what I started off doing was weighing out 2 identical sets of grain for dual 5-gallon batches of alt beer. That grain bill was 61% Mecca grade Pelton malt, which is their Pilsner style malt, 16% Metolius, which is Mecca grade's Munich style malt, 16% Venora, that's their Vienna style malt, 5% Crystal 15, 2% Gladfield light chocolate malt. That's not really like a pale chocolate. It's just not a super dark roasted chocolate malt. I think it's about 350 Lovibond from Gladfield out of New Zealand. One batch of those grains were milled while the other remained whole kernel. Both were placed in separate plastic bags that I squeezed as much air out of as I could, tied a knot in the top, and then I set them on my workbench and returned 6 months later to brew. So these grains set out for 6 whole months, one of them milled, one of them not. Now, the reason I did it that way is because I did want to control for malt batch, if you will. So they both, all the grains came from the same bag, which means they were effectively the same age. We were looking specifically at the impact that milling has when on grain that's been sitting out for a while, as opposed to whole kernel.
And you just left that in your garage, right?
Yeah, and I believe it was April when I milled them, and came back 6 months later in September. So they went through a real nice Fresno summer, which temperatures can get up into the 110, 112 degree Fahrenheit range, which is pretty warm. I think that's like 44 degrees C or something like that. So they were just sitting out there in the garage. It was fairly dark.
And I love it. Just in a trash bag in the garage, yeah. Sitting out there for 6 months. I love it. Like, if you could have treated these grains any more poorly.
Well, hey, listen, the trash bags were clean at least. They were fresh, clean trash bags.
Did you sanitize the trash bags before you? No, just kidding.
Yeah. So when I returned 6 months later, both of the beers were brewed using the same processes. I mashed at 156 degrees Fahrenheit or 69 degrees C for 60 minutes. Proceeded to boil both batches for 60 minutes, and they received 20 grams of hops at 60 minutes. I believe that was Magnum, and then 30 grams of Hallertau Mittelfrüh at 15 minutes left in the boil. After the boil, the worts were chilled before I took refractometer readings that showed, surprisingly to me, they both achieved the same exact 1051 OG. This surprised me based on what I'd heard about this whole idea of milling grain and leaving it out can have some sort of a negative impact on conversion.
Yeah, that one really surprised me too. That's always been what I've heard, that you definitely have a reduced efficiency from leaving those grains out for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
Especially for 6 months. I mean, I'd heard people say, leaving it out for a week could result in reduced efficiency.
Same here.
So that one was really impressive to me, that it actually hit the exact same OG. That's not just a subjective measurement. I mean, that's an objective analytical measurement.
Absolutely.
That the efficiency of these was the same.
Well, and it's also a testament to the lack of movement in my Monster Mill MM3, because I sort of expect, I was like, man, how do I, I'm not constantly mucking around with my mill gap. I just kind of set it, tightened it as tight as I could, and left it alone. The fact that these both came back with the same OG says to me that it was the same crush. Now, side by side, the crushes looked identical as well. So all good there. I couldn't believe 1051 OG, which was what was planned for both of these batches. I transferred 5.5 gallons or 21 liters of each wort to stainless brew buckets that were then placed in my fermentation chamber and left to finish chilling to my desired temperature of 66 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 19C. Before I pitched a single pouch of Imperial Yeast GO2 Kaiser into each one. In both batches, again, I was kind of expecting to see some sort of a difference in fermentation activity, but both batches were showing signs of activity the following day and proceeded to ferment similarly over the next 2 weeks, at which point activity was absent, and I took hydrometer measurements showing that both beers fermented to the very same 1012 FG. Again, a part of me expected to see some sort of a difference in attenuation or something like that, but no. I mean, at this point, these beers, with the exception of the variable, which is, aged crushed malt, these beers were looking pretty identical.
Yeah, that one, I guess when you hit the same original gravity, I kind of would expect at that point to hit the same, final gravity. But there is a vector, right? That okay, maybe we hit the same original gravity, but I've got long chain sugars in here because there's already some reaction that has happened for staling. So, there's going to be something that the yeast can't eat. And maybe that residual sugar is what's going to cause the staling off flavor at the end. So that would be how you'd test, for that. If the attenuation was different, then that means that there's some sort of sugar or something in there that wasn't consumed by the yeast.
Right.
And maybe that's another, yet another objective data point that shows that these beers seem to have at least behaved similarly in the fermentation and in the mash process.
Right. At this point, I think, all we can say to this point, the measurement of the FG is that milling grain and leaving it out doesn't seem to have too much of an objective impact in terms of conversion and efficiency and, attenuation. But of course, I'm taking these measurements and I'm going, well, that, I've heard rumors, I've heard speculation that maybe it'll impact that, but really all the talk surrounds flavor and whatnot. So I was still convinced that we might still get some noticeable, from a sensory perspective, noticeable differences between these beers once they were finished up. Now, as an aside, I do use a hydrometer for my FG measurements almost solely because I like to sample the beers at that point. I'm one of those people who absolutely does not believe that a sample that you pull from the fermenter tastes like the finished beer. You can get hints, but once it's finished and it's carbonated and it's cleared up a bit, it always tastes different and much better to me than the FG sample. I do remember tasting these ones and my biased mind going, oh, maybe there's something there. We had to see about it. And so I ended up cold crashing these beers to 34 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree C over 2 days and then racking them to sanitized kegs, which were placed in my keezer and burst carbonated, then left to condition over a week in my keezer before they were ready to serve. So did the differences that I kind of presumed I was detecting carry over into the finished beer? Well, first off, poured next to each other, the beers looked exactly identical to me. There was a little part of me wondering if maybe, what we talk about with cold side oxidation, how it seems to darken beers a little bit. Maybe the one that was milled and left out for 6 months would be a little bit darker. or something, but no, they looked absolutely identical to my eyes. Now, if you look at the photos on the website, one of them has more condensation on the glass.
I was going to ask about that. I was looking at the photos on the website. That the one that was fresh milled looks a little bit hazier, but it also looks like there's a lot of condensation on it. So
yeah, that now. I didn't, my memory of it was that they looked identical, but in September it's kind of warm here, and it's hard to take a picture of a glass of beer without there being condensation on it. So,
but for sure. The color though, I mean, those look identical. I can't tell any difference in the color.
Right. The foam was the same. The color looked the same. So because I was so curious about this one, and I'd invested 6 months in this experiment, I actually attempted 12 triangle tests on this one. So I sat down, and we have a way of doing this. When we serve ourselves triangle tests, the way that I've come to do it is I'll serve myself. I'll get 4 of the same color of our triangle test cups. I usually end up using green for some reason. And then I'll mark the bottom of 2 of them. And then I'll keep the other 2 cups won't have a mark on the bottom. And then I'll fill 2 of the cups that are marked with one of the beers, and I'll fill the other 2 with the other beer. And then I'll have my kids, as I'm turned around, mix them up, and then I'll randomly pick 3 of them. And then I go and try to pick the odd beer out of those 3. There will always be an odd beer out, and it should, effectively randomize which one is different. In this one, out of 12 attempts, I picked the odd beer out 4 times, which is exactly 1/3, which is exactly random chance. These beers tasted identical to my palate.
Love it. Especially because you had already, had some, maybe not bias, but you'd already had some inclination that these beers were going to taste different based on your testing from the hydrometer tube. But then in the triangle, here we go. 1/3 of the time, just random guessing. Yeah.
And I was, like you said, I was biased on many levels. I not only had kind of this, I guess, presumption that they were going to be or could possibly be different. I brewed the beers. I knew exactly what was done with them. I knew what to look for, and people argue all the time. Well, if the tasters knew what to look for and weren't blind to the experiment, maybe they would find it. I'm just not sure that's the case. I mean, I especially in this one, but I knew everything to look for in this. Neither of the beers had a stale character at all. One could argue, right? In my triangle test experience alone, one could argue, well, you just either aren't sensitive to stale flavors, and both beers were, or that both beers were stale, right? We hear that one often as well. Either way, I enjoyed the beers. I thought they were absolutely delicious, and my palate could not tell them apart. But what about blind participants? Well, I served this triangle test to 26 participants. Again, they had no clue what was going on with these. Out of that 26, in order for us to say that they were, statistically distinguishable, as it were, 14 people would have had to identify the unique sample. Out of that 26, only 11 people, which is 42% of the participants, picked the odd beer out, which means that this one was not statistically significant. People could not reliably tell these beers apart.
That is so interesting. I wish I could go and take these results to some of the people that I have had arguments about milling grains, and just be like, look, here's it's only one result, and I know that I don't want to offend anybody. I'm not saying that this changes anything. This is one result,
right?
But it's been consistent with my experience. It's one result, so I think that I would put weight into this experiment personally. You don't have to do that, and that's okay. But this one seems to make sense to me. And like I said, this is one of those that I kind of want to just print out and take with me and just say, no, look, here's an experiment that says that doesn't matter.
Yeah. The beauty of the internet is you don't need to print things out anymore. That's kind of what I,
good. That's right. I'm sorry.
Share the link.
Yeah. I'm old school.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. So, this one threw me for a loop as well, only because of how much importance others and myself had placed on making sure to use milled grains as soon as possible. I'm telling you, whether you trust my palate or not, these beers, not only were they really good, I rather enjoyed this alt beer. I don't make that style often enough, and I really should. Absolutely delicious style. I could not for the life of me pick them apart. And even in blind side, just not unblinded side by sides, drinking them next to each other, it was like I had 2 kegs of the identical beer on. When you really take a step back and look at the fact that those grains were sitting milled in a 100+ degree garage for a couple of months, and then, up to 78 to 85 degree Fahrenheit garage for the rest of the time for 6 months. I mean, come on now. That's crazy. To me, the implications of this are at least, if you got some grain and you, like my buddy who left me those other batch of grains that we'll talk about in a future episode, it had been a month and he was like, dude, I'm not going to use them. They're stale. I don't think so. I just don't think that's the case. I'm comfortable saying that for my own personal brewing. I know that there will be people out there saying, well, that, there's no way to really truly measure it. But I kind of trust the whole sensory analysis thing because we taste beer with our mouths. Maybe you could measure oxidation in some way of grain. We didn't do that. I don't know how you would do that. But in my book, these beers were identical.
Well, and that's to me what matters, right? The sensory profile is what matters. I mean, there could be some objective differences in these beers, and that's great. But if nobody can taste the difference, that's to me what matters.
Yeah.
This one, like I said, this one confirms my personal anecdotal experience with crushed grains and that stuff. I've never had an issue with staling.
Yeah.
Whenever I've left those mills out, but leaving those out for 6 months in 100+ degree weather, I'm sitting here thinking if I could do that here in Texas, I probably wouldn't because it gets super humid. But still, I mean, in a trash bag in the garage for 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean, this is about as extreme as you could get. Maybe not. I mean, there's always more extreme, but this is pretty extreme from what I think most people are doing, and certainly way more extreme than what the current, what the dogma is.
Right.
Of milling as soon as, milling and then immediately mashing in.
Well, yeah. So I own a mill and I keep grains in bulk on hand. So this really isn't an issue for me. And I'm definitely not like recommending that people mill their grain and store it out. I feel like people misperceive often what our intent is. I'm not sitting here saying, oh yeah, mill your grain and then let it sit out. It's going to make better beer. What I feel like can be gleaned from this particular experiment though, is if you go to the homebrew shop and on a Thursday and you plan on brewing on Sunday, you probably have nothing to worry about. If you go to the homebrew shop on a Thursday and you have to put off brewing on Sunday for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, it's probably not going to be a big deal. Don't toss those grains. Don't convince yourself that you're going to produce a bad beer. Make the beer anyways. It is just beer. And I trust, based on my experience with this experiment, I trust that your beer is going to turn out fine. So
right, or even the people that are waiting the night before. An easy way to plan your brew day ahead to make sure that your brew day is short enough is mill the grains the night before.
Oh yeah,
I still have people all the time that say I am not leaving those grains to sit out overnight. And this was 6 months in somebody's hot garage.
In a garbage bag of all things.
In a garbage bag. I just keep going back to that and going, okay, guys, if I see this as even if you're not buying your grains from, even if you're not buying your grains in bulk, and you do have a mill, even if you aren't buying your grains from the brew shop and having them mill it, you're buying in bulk and you have your grains, you're milling them. If you have time on Wednesday to mill the grain and you're not going to have time Friday, Thursday or Friday, do it Wednesday and still brew on Saturday.
Yeah, break up your brew day.
I don't think there's any issue in doing that. And I think that these results, again, coupled with my personal experience, are going to make me much less concerned going forward about having grains crushed ahead of time.
Amen. And if you choose to continue believing that you have to mill 14 seconds before mashing in, then by all means, continue on. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way or following tradition at all. We don't even hate on that. So, well, as you might imagine, we got a bunch of reader comments on this one. I had to be real choosy in picking the ones to read because they were all really long as well. So we're going to get to those now. First one comes from Dave Hartley. He said, as a beginning brewer, I'd order 2 to 3 kits worth of pre-crushed grains at a time. Then life would happen, and it would be months before the last all-grain beer kit would get brewed. The bag of grains would sit in the box under the bench in the kitchen until brew day. That sounds better than my garbage bag storage.
Yeah, it sounds a little safer.
He says, I always felt this underlying tension that I wasn't getting to brew the beer these crushed grains represented. In the end, the beers came out great, and he says his goal is making tasty beer at the $20 a case price point. I'm glad to see while I was violating convention, my experience is similar to this experiment.
Nice. I wish I could get to the $20 per case price point. I don't know that I've actually looked recently to see what the cost of all the ingredients and stuff. I know, especially with hops, the way that they are these days, and New England IPAs, there's no way I'm at $20 a case.
That's why I don't brew those beers, man.
yeah, right, exactly. Me much easier. It's much easier to brew a nice lager and get that in around the $20 a case price point. But yeah, man, that's a great. There's yet another anecdote. So he's buying 2 to 3 kits and letting months pass before he's actually, able to brew with crushed grains. So yet another anecdotal experience that seems to confirm my experience and the results of this experiment.
Yeah, right. It jibes with the results, and this is something I hadn't considered as somebody who doesn't buy, recipe kits. But how cool to know that you can go pick up 4 kits for your next 4 months of brewing or a couple of months of brewing, and you get that grain milled and have it all prepped and ready, sitting on a shelf for you to use. I mean, to me, there's an element of that comes with these types of results. So good on you, Dave. The next comment comes from Mark. He says, a key part of your experiment was that you stored the milled grain in a well-sealed container and removed excess air from the bag. Some shops I have used provide the milled grain in brown paper bags versus plastic bags, which I would feel are less than desirable for long-term storage. One shop near me, which closed, used plastic bags, and I picked up multiple brew sessions of milled grain at their closeout sale. And even after a couple of months, that grain/beer was fine. My recommendation to others, confirmed by this experiment, is to store the milled grains well, and they're good for a couple of months at least. Thanks for further confirmation. I actually didn't keep the grains stored in a container. I don't know if he was just referring to the garbage bag or not, but I just had it in a plastic bag sitting on my shelf in a relatively dark corner of my garage for 6 months. So, but that said, I feel like even in this comment, and it's totally understandable, that it's just really hard to peel away from this idea that milling grains is somehow going to expedite the staling process. Barring a really humid environment or some other weird environmental, vector, I just don't know if that's the case. I mean, I left mine out for 6 months in a arguably poor storage, situation, and these beers came out not only similar but really good.
Yeah, I wouldn't call. I mean, I guess a plastic bag is better than a brown paper bag.
In what respect, though? I mean, that's like in terms of keeping oxygen out. I don't know. I mean, it's not like
yeah, good point. I mean, good point. I mean, maybe it's not even all that different anyway. But even still, even a plastic bag, a plastic trash bag is still going to allow oxygen ingress,
totally.
And especially with the temperature changes that you had. If those plastic bags are getting up to 100 degrees, I can guarantee you they're not as well sealed as maybe some other containers that we would normally still store grains in.
Yeah, and I promise you that over 6 months that there was exchange through that plastic bag. I mean, it's a thin plastic garbage bag. It wasn't like one of those big hefty like leaf bags. It was just a typical plastic garbage bag that you use in your house. So I'm just not sure. I'm not sitting here trying to convince people to believe that milling grain doesn't and letting it sit out doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that in my mind, being unable to come up with a good reason for why it would, and then pairing that with these results, I'm just not sure that it's even required, to I don't know, to store it in some specifically special way and make sure to use it within 2 months, personally.
Right. I mean, I totally agree based on my experience. Yeah, I mean, this one, this experiment and leaving it out, and this is yet another confirmation here too. Where he's saying that he's even after a couple of months left crushed grain out, and it was fine.
Yeah. Next comment comes from Ben, who says, I've never had problems with crushed grain staling. I guess it could absorb moisture if stored somewhere humid, then get moldy, but I think paranoia about oxygen is unwarranted. If it was a significant problem, people would crush their own, quote, fresh flour for making bread, cakes. Here you go. I think there's an element of post-purchase rationalization involved and advice on techniques involving brewing equipment. Anyone who's invested significant money or labor in brewing is likely to be biased in favor of its merits, whether or not it actually makes a difference, and then spread the word on forums, etc. Hence, brewing fridges for temp control, grain mills for the freshest beer, wort chillers for the clearest beer, thermopen thermometers because mash temp is critical, kegging because kegged beer is superior to bottled beer, etc., etc., etc. As the Short and Shoddy series shows, it's not hard to make good beer with simple gear and techniques. Oh boy, he's I don't know if he's throwing flames there, but I can't say I disagree with Ben.
Oh man, I was just sitting here reading through that comment and I was like, yeah, agree with that. Yeah, agree with that. Oh yeah, he's gonna keep going. Yep, still agree. Yeah. No, I mean, this is I totally agree with all this. You know, I think you said there's an element of post-purchase rationalization.
Yeah.
I think there's also an element of mimicking what professional brewers do. You know, I don't think any professional brewers are milling their grain and letting them sit out in store because that would require an additional storage space.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're, you know, they may have convinced themselves over the years that it causes a difference if they let crushed grains set out. You know, and maybe there are some brewers out there that believe that they have actually gotten stale beer because of letting crushed grains stale out. You know, but just, you know, the professional brewers are getting their grain from their silo, from their grain bags or pallets. They're running it through their mill and then they're immediately mashing it. You know, like I said, but
they're milling it directly into their mash tuns 99% of the time. I mean, that's just how it works.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there may have been a reason for it. You know, like I said, there's a perfectly legitimate reason of, I don't want to have to store crushed grain someplace. You know, I've got the grain. I've already got to store the grain in the bags. It comes to me that way.
Right.
I don't want to go and have to store another set of crushed grain and then have to get that crushed grain to the mash tun whenever I need it, you know? So.
Yeah. This Ben's comment, you know, kind of took me down, just as I'm sitting here considering some of the stuff he said, a couple thoughts here. You know, I don't think it's a far stretch. Saying this might rile some people, you know, ruffle some people's feathers, but if you just take a quick, you know, little step back, there's a lot of gatekeeping in homebrewing and brewing in general. I mean, you know, people love tradition, and they will argue that just because it was written in the BJCP guidelines or just because it was written in some book, that makes it a fact. I'm not necessarily against that, but I just don't think in those terms. I'm not going to just appeal to authority. I'm not just going to adopt that because that somebody else said it. So there is that piece of it. And I feel like Ben kind of tickles that a little bit. But then the other thing is this concept of like post hoc justification. And it makes me think of a lot of the, you know, we've had episodes in the past on fermentation temperature as it regards lager beers and how I ferment a lot of my lagers these days at ale temperature, 66F or 19C. And the beers come out really, really good. Like I'm winning awards, and I've won awards with beers fermented like that. And I just feel what I mean by this post hoc justification is, well, we did it this way because that was what we kind of developed as a, you know, that was what the people who came before us were doing because of environmental, you know, confines and whatnot. And then we look back at that and say, well, because they did it that way, that makes it the best way. And that's how we need to do it now. And I feel like it kind of goes with this as well. I mean, you referred to the influence that, you know, professional brewing and kind of mimicking that has on home brewing. You know, maybe it is the case that it just was easier to mill grain immediately and mash in right directly with it. And then those of us who are brewing on the homebrew scale said, well, because they do it that way, that's the best way. And they're doing it because let's invent something. Oh, freshness. That's what it is. Freshness, of course. It's obvious. It's just an interesting thought, the way to think about this, I think, for me at least.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, I talked earlier about also transporting grains, you know. So, I mean, transporting grains crushed that maybe aren't sealed in plastic containers or maybe aren't, you know, maybe have exposure to humidity and moisture in the back of a truck,
right.
You know, maybe there's also that component. I mean, I have no idea. I could probably sit here today and come up with, you know, 20 or 30 reasons why you know, you're not doing the crushing beforehand just from sort of a practical standpoint that has nothing to do with beer staling, beer flavor, or reduced efficiency.
Yeah, and then just start a home brewing forum and make it popular, and people will believe it.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Oh, geez. All right. Next comment comes from Mark Stolowski. He says, very interesting. When I first started doing all grain, I was told by a brewer that had several years under his belt that I was risking getting, quote, stale malt flavors. We've all heard that because I was milling my malt the day before brewing, less than 24 hours. So for years, I was paranoid about this, even though I usually still would mill at the day before. I would agree that a fresh batch purchased recently of milled malt versus old milled malt would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I think you and I've been talking about. The people that just say, I'm not even going to brew it the day before. I'm not even going to mill it the day before I brew, just because it would do it. A fresh batch of milled malt versus an old milled malt. I mean, that may be interesting. But Marshall, I mean, that's essentially exactly what Marshall did. By letting it sit in his garage for 6 months. Marshall controlled for, the grain itself, which I think is important for this experiment because we were just testing that one variable about whether, aged whole barley versus aged milled barley. In this one, you're talking about, I think, using entirely fresh grains. And there is something to that point of, if it's a different lot or comes from a different farm or a different, a different field even inside of the farm, those may have some differences that might contribute to a different flavor. So controlling that on an experiment perspective is a little bit difficult.
Yeah. My hunch on that one, if we were to take, let's leave milling out of it for a sec. If we were to take a 2-year-old sack of, let's say, Mecca grade Pelton malt, and then get a sack fresh from Mecca, and just compare a 100%, Pelton malt beers, my hunch would be that they would taste, they'd be indistinguishable. That's my hunch. But if they weren't, we wouldn't be able to say that it was because of anything other than, or I guess a better way to put it, we wouldn't be able to isolate that difference as being from age of malt, because it could be something else that changed in the malting process and that kind of stuff, or the growing process, or whatever it may be. And that's kind of the difficulty with that experiment. Does that invalidate the experiment? I don't think so. I think it'd still be interesting. So we should probably plan on doing something like that soon. So
for sure.
But it is, I think the neurotic in me looks at these things and wants to really isolate it down to, distill it down to the variable that we're looking at. So. All right, final comment comes from Pablo54. He says, I would have loved to know the temperature and humidity surrounding the grains. All right, we did talk a little bit about this, but I'll just reiterate it here. The grains were milled in early April of 2018 and then used in late September, so right around 6 months. They sat in my garage from springtime through most of summer. It was September, and again, during those months, July, August, we're up above 100 degree Fahrenheit, which is like 40 degrees Celsius or so. Most of the time, I would say that in April, we're pushing at nighttime. Maybe my garage would get down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is about 14 or 15 degrees C. So a range over that 6 month period of, pretty good temp swings. The humidity here is always dry, even when it's raining. It's dry. I mean, I don't know how else to explain that. And I feel like on the fact that I do buy my grain in bulk and all that is sort of a benefit of how dry it is here. So not real humid. And I would caution anyone who is, maybe thinking about buying 4 or 5 milled grain kits, recipe kits, that if you live in a real humid area, make sure you store those grains in a place they're not going to be impacted by that moisture in the air. Because I do think, moisture does have an impact on things, and you wouldn't want to brew with moldy grain.
Yeah, I mean, I made some comments earlier about this for Texas, and I would caution, if you're in a high humidity area, even unmilled, even whole grain, if you're not taking precautions on how you store that, I think even the best containers can still allow, oxygen ingress and potentially some humidity to get inside. I mean, plastic containers are certainly like plastic bags.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you've got it in some sort of stainless steel drum, you're probably fine. But I don't know how many people have, 55-gallon stainless steel drums sitting around.
Right.
Right. But humidity, I think, would be a concern and a consideration. So I would caution people, we've talked a lot about, that this didn't have a huge impact on the crush grains based on the storing conditions that Marshall used. If you're going to have access to high humidity, don't throw out, if you're storing your grains appropriately, or what you feel like is appropriately and you're doing good beer, then keep doing that.
Yeah.
We're not saying just chuck chuck what you're doing out the window because of the results of this experiment.
Yeah.
We're just sharing our own anecdotes and stuff. But humidity to me does seem like it might present an issue for even whole grains.
No, I agree. And I've heard horror stories with humidity, impacting grains. At the very least, what I would say is, if you're too scared to use those milled grains that you have, give them to a friend who maybe isn't so scared. Because
if you're close to me, I'll brew with them.
Yeah, likewise. Well, Cade, that brings us to the end of this episode. Anything else before we hit the road?
No, sounds good, you guys. Keep making good beer.
Amen to that. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read up on the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.